A lot of people ask me how I got started in this business. I thought that my fear of speaking to groups was a singular deficiency. When it came to speaking to more than 3 or 4 people, I just fell apart. When I was 30 years old, I had a whole change of life. I realized that the one way to tackle your fears was to just jump in head first. 2 times before I was set to go on, I had my bag packed and I walked out of the hotel hailing down a cab. Here I was going out and speaking to groups of 300-400 people at a time. All I remember is the rivulets of sweat just pouring down my face. The 3rd day I said something came to me, it was sarcastic. And a bunch of people laughed. This isn't so bad. And by the end of the week, I was totally hooked. Once you have a taste of it and you realize that it's a good thing, it's something that you need to have. You need to get your fix over and over again.
Without any further delay, Doug Jeffries.
Thank you, Tim. Good evening. My name is Doug Jeffries, and I want to welcome you all to this 90-minute program on enhancing your presentation skills that we call Nail It. And I also want to warn you that after today, you're never going to be able to look at another presenter or be able to sit through another presentation in quite the same way. You're going to learn what it takes to actually make it work when you get up here and speak, and you're going to thus develop a very critical eye every time you see somebody get up here on the stage. You're going to notice whether they're doing it right or whether they're doing it wrong. You will know what 99% of business presenters don't know, and that is how to create effective knowledge transfer. And that's a good thing, because going forward, when you have to get up and give presentations, this sensitivity will be something that will be in the back of your mind all the time. You'll be asking yourself, am I doing it according to the rules or not? And with that sensitivity, you will be thinking about every time you get up here and do it. And the great thing about presentation skills is once you know what to do, once you know how to do it correctly, every single time you have the opportunity to get up and speak, you get a little bit better. The net effect is going to be that you're going to have audiences following you as they never have before. The very first time you put these techniques you're going to learn here today into effect, you're going to see an entirely different response from your audience. Presentation skills are a lifelong skill-building endeavor. And the more opportunities you have to speak, if you start out the right way, the more opportunities you have to get a little bit better. We're going to show you here tonight that most of the behaviors that people engage in when they get up in front of the room tend to be counterproductive both for them as a presenter and counterproductive for the audience. Most of the way that people do speak come from behaviors that we've been practicing since a very early age.
We say that 99% of all presenters engage in the same behaviors. And the reality is those are behaviors that we were taught. Most of us taught from a young age. And our reaction to those behaviors, our negative reactions, have been building up and building up. And it's because we've engaged in certain actions. Again, the great thing about this program is we don't ask people to change their belief systems. We don't say, well, when you get up there, you got to feel this way. We tell you it's simple. Do this, your body and the audience will respond like this.
Some of you might be familiar with this list. This actually comes from the Book of Lists, 1977. But when humans are asked what's the thing they're most afraid of? Since they've been asking this question, actually speaking before a group always filters to the top. It is humans' number one fear. Interesting thing with this list here, you look at speaking to a group at 41% and down here death at 19%. Seinfeld famously said of this list, it suggests that at a funeral, the person giving the eulogy would rather be in the box. But it's true, there are good reasons why people actually feel this fear when they get up to speak in front of a group. When I say they feel this fear, what I'm talking about is the emotions that run through you are a function of the chemicals that are running through you, and the chemicals that are running through you when you find yourself up in front of a group are the exact same chemicals that are coursing through your veins when, when the front tire on your minivan blows out at 70 miles an hour on the expressway. It's the exact same response. And so when we find ourselves speaking and we have these feelings inside, we equate it as fear. And like a lot of things that require 3 elements, it requires all 3. If you only do 2 out of 3, you don't quite make it. First thing is you have to have something to say. But more than having something to say, you need to have something to say that is of meaning to your audience. Your presentation has to contain worthwhile enough content that has enough in it for your audience members to get them to sit through it. When I say in it for that, you always have to be thinking when you put together a presentation. You always have to be asking yourself. In fact, actually what you have to do is you have to get off the stage and get back at the audience, look up at the screen and ask yourself, if I were a person of the audience, is there really something in it for me? Because unfortunately, the old WIIFM, what's in it for me, is the only thing that audiences are ever listening to. And anything you put into your presentation that does not relate to the audience, that does not give them a benefit or benefit they perceive, they're not going to be tuned in. So you have to have content. Then what you have to do is you have to put it together. You have to put this content together into a design, a format, that actually allows every member of the audience to follow your arguments every step of the way. If we're talking about PowerPoint, which is pretty ubiquitous in corporate America today, if we're talking about PowerPoint, your design has to allow for a flow of information in such a way that every member of the audience, every individual member of the audience is on the same page and on the same wavelength as you every step of the way. Now, the interesting thing is that if you have something worth saying and you're able to put it together in a proper design, then the last part here, delivery, the part that gives most people the most anxiety, actually isn't all that difficult. A lot of people have a hard time believing that, but what you're going to see is an entirely new approach to putting together presentations and delivering them to your audience so that you end up actually not having to do a whole lot of work. In fact, this is what we do all week long, is we have classes where we show people that, okay, first of all, you have to learn some of the rules of what you do when you're up in front of a group, how you address people, what you do with your body, what you do with your voice and your eyes, but none of that really counts for anything unless you can deliver a presentation that is designed to allow you to do it properly. So again, all 3, like going out to a fancy restaurant. You've got to have food, it's got to have service, it's got to have atmosphere, and if you're missing any one of the 3, you're missing a great experience. Presentations work the same way. First rule is this: if you're working too hard, you're doing it wrong. Most of the things that people do, most of the behaviors in which they engage when they're up here on the stage involve trying to do way too many things at one time. And it's the attempt to manage all these different things at one time that help to fuel the anxiety people feel. We're going to show you that the way to do it right is to figure out how to work much more simply than what you're used to. Most of the problems people have when they speak come from the fact that they're trying to do way too many things at once. They try to keep track of way too many variables. They try to, they have too many things going on in their head at one time. They're working too hard, and if you're working too hard, you're doing it wrong. In fact, obviously everybody knows that today we live in a very multitasking environment, right? We're expected to do all sorts of things at the same time. The greatest thing about speaking, when you speak before a group, is if you're doing it right, you learn how to do what I guess man did at one time in his history. It's called unitasking. Unitasking, it's a word, I don't know if it's in the dictionary, but unitasking. It means doing one thing at a time, and that's the beautiful thing about it. I often tell people I hardly think I'm ever working when I'm speaking because it's one of the easiest things I can do. I never have more than one thing that I'm thinking about at one time, and we'll see how this works. The second rule is that when you do it right, it's always a win-win for both you and the audience. If you're doing what you're supposed to be doing at any given time, the speaker wins, the speaker gets benefits, and the audience gets benefits at the same time. It's always a back and forth.
Finally, the third rule is probably the most difficult one for people to actually engage in practice, but it's probably the most important too, and that is this: people only start listening when you stop talking. See, most people think that getting up in front of a group is all about opening their mouth and impressing the audience with the breadth and depth of their knowledge, and that usually means a continuous stream of words that come from the presenter's mouth. The problem, as you'll see, is when people do that, audiences don't have a chance to really listen. All of the best speakers out there, people you consider to be great speakers, know this rule, that people only start to listen to you once you stop talking. And if you think about that, just think about some of the best jokes you've ever heard. Think about a comedian who delivers a joke. Some of the ones that are really funny are the ones that it takes you a second or two after the punchline's delivered, before your brain can process what was really said, as opposed to what you thought it was going to be. And when you hear that, wow, that's funny, you start to laugh. People only start to listen after you stop talking. All right, first thing we want to do, though, is we want to have some fun, and I don't know if anybody warned you about this. Anybody suggest that this event might have a participatory part to it? You kind of figured this, but one of the great things about training is most of the time you can just come in, sit down in a seat, nice darkened auditorium, kind of cruise back. Nobody really knows who you are because you're part of a big group, and you can just kind of, put forth as much energy into picking up what's going on as you want to. We need 6 people who are willing to just come up and simply tell us their name, tell us what they do for a living, and tell us why they hate speaking in public. How's that? We'll ask you to speak for maybe, 20 seconds. Sir, please. Thank you. We got 2. Yes, sir? Yes, sir? Do we have anybody of, yes, the female persuasion. Great. 6 people 1, 2, whose 3, mamas 4. You can just kind of line up here. I'll ask you to stand by the podium. 1, 2, 3. Come on, we need 2 more. 2 more people. Sir, please. Yeah. We'll just get you out of the spotlight. And we got 5 people. That's good enough. We got 5. No, I say, without further ado, step right up.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kathleen Otto, and I work in a really exciting field of the life sciences.
I have a Shockley business, and I also teach health and wellness for Immaculata University.
Area. I have been working for a
My name is Christy Terpstra, and I'm from the South Central. I live outside of Houston, and I'm an ASC.
I'm a director for a software quality assurance company based in Plymouth Meeting. The reason I'm here is because I do realize that public speaking...
Round of applause to all these people who did what you wouldn't all do, which is come down here. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much. What I want you to do, as we go through these, try to count the number of seconds that anybody here maintains eye contact in any one spot. Okay, let's try this. 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2, 1 and 1, 1 and 1 and 1. Okay, very good. All right, 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 and 2 and 1 and can't see, but are you starting to see a pattern here? You starting to see a pattern in how long most people maintain eye contact when speaking to groups. 1 and, well, thank you very much, all of you who contributed. Give yourselves a hand. Go. What can we say? What do we see here as far as eyes? What would you say about eye contact? Good hands, okay. Hands, it was kind of difficult to tell what they were doing with their hands, because, of course, at a podium, as soon as your hands touch the podium, 10,000 volts, right? Difficult. And standing, of course, the same. How about their pace at which they spoke, the speed? Pretty good? We weren't bored, weren't waiting for the next word? Volume and inflection, we were all able to hear. Well, you got mic'd up, so it's a lot easier. That's cheating. And any ums and ahs? Do we hear ums and ahs? Yeah. A few. Eye contact is the one thing that, as you'll see, is probably the most critical to getting your point across. The trouble with eye contact is that for most of us, at some point, you probably got this bit of advice. Anybody hear this before? Look at everyone in the group. So we were told that that's a good thing, that you want to look at everybody in the group. The problem is that nobody ever told us exactly how to do that. And so as a result, what we see every single time we do this is a phenomenon that we call aerosol eyes. And it kind of looks like this. Speaker's up in front of the room, and that's what people do. They get up, and knowing that it's a good thing to look at everyone in the audience, they tend to spray the audience with their vision. Well, sometimes when we speak, we tend to look down the whole time like this, hoping there's notes on the podium or the floor. Sometimes when we speak, we look up like this, hoping we'll find divine inspiration. But for the most part, people tend to do just this, spray the audience with their vision, never holding eye contact for more than a second at a time. And you understand that that causes a few problems. When you're in a situation in front of a group like this, what your brain instantly knows is, uh-oh, I got a problem. The problem is there's only one of me and there's a whole bunch of them. It's a classic case of one against many. And every time the brain determines that it's in a situation where there's one against many, the fight or flight sequence kicks in. And when that happens, the center of our brain called the hypothalamus, which is geared into the optic nerve and to the olfactory senses, it's always monitoring our hearing. It's monitoring the entire environment. In fact, the hypothalamus actually regulates all functions of the body, but one of the functions it regulates is how equipped the body is to deal with things like threats. And so when it finds itself threatened, what it does is sends a bunch of hormones down the pituitary gland at the base of your skull, and then the pituitary sends a bunch of hormones down to the adrenal glands, right up here above your kidneys, and what do you suppose the adrenal glands kick out? Right, adrenaline. And here's what adrenaline does. First thing it does is it gets your heart beating a lot faster. Second thing it does is it increases the force of your heart constrictions, the thump, 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 because it's trying to pump as much as it can. So faster beating heart, beating more, squeezing harder. So the whole idea here is to try to get as much blood flow to both the muscles, ones that can help you fight or flee, and also to those parts of the brain that control those muscles, the motor sections of the brain. The unfortunate part there is, where do you suppose it gets that blood from? Oh, that's right, those other parts like the cerebral cortex, places where you think. It drains it from there to get to the motor sections. And then finally, adrenaline ups your metabolism so that it can help metabolize glucose. It gets glucose in your blood sugar, turns to glycogen, the form that the cells can use, because it's trying to get as much energy as possible, right? When it does that, when it metabolizes, when it raises your metabolism, it raises your body temperature, you tend to sweat a little bit. It's also a very dehydrative process, so you might end up finding your throat a little bit dry. Then the last thing the adrenals do, most times the hormones are always associated with anti-hormones. There's noradrenaline kicked out too. Noradrenaline is a vasoconstrictive. It's designed to get your blood pressure up. When your blood pressure is up, you sometimes feel that in terms of a flushness in your face. Anybody feel any of those symptoms when they speak? Interesting. Yes. And that's exactly what the body is doing, what it's supposed to do. It's recognizing this threat. Now, the really interesting thing about this, though, is, has anybody ever felt those symptoms? Well, let me ask the people who are up here, who are kind enough to sacrifice themselves for you. Did you feel any of those symptoms before you started talking, even, knowing that your turn was coming? Isn't that weird? And you find that sometimes when you're, and the rest of you, like you're at a meeting or something, and somebody says, let's just, we don't all know each other, so let's just get up and tell us a little bit about yourself, and you know it's coming around, and you start to feel the thump thump, you know what I mean? Well, isn't that strange? I mean, it makes sense that when you're faced with a physical threat, that this would kick in, but why does it happen even before the body senses that? Understand, every time the brain calls on the system to send out this adrenaline, to start this whole process, not only does it do that, but again, because its job is to keep you alive, what it does is it forms what's known as a fear memory. Every time the processes start, files away a little thing called a fear memory. And the purpose of the fear memory is to give you a head start. So the first time you're walking through the savannah, you come around a turn, there's a saber-toothed tiger, jumps out in front of you. You go, and run away. The next time you're walking through the savannah, your brain hears the rustle of the leaves that it remembers happened just before the saber-toothed tiger jumped out last time. And because of this fear memory that was created, it starts the process even before you're presented with a stimuli. the fear memory gives you a head start and keeps you alive. If we could look into the eyes of a speaker, if we could see what it looks like to be from here looking at an audience, and of course we have this technology at Public Speaking Skills, we keep track of the anxiety over on the left-hand side here, and over on the right-hand side, we're counting the number of seconds that the speaker's vision is ever held in any one spot. And if you look through the viewfinder here, this is exactly what a speaker sees. Every time it looks around, what it's doing, every time it sees a new image, it's picking up the color of your clothes, the look in your eyes, the hunch of your shoulders, the countenance. It's trying to decide, is this person going to jump across their seat, come out and try to kill me, eat me? Do I have to? And pretty soon, every time it does that, pretty soon, again, we get into this visual overstimulation. We just get too much. Every single time we move, your brain unfortunately takes in everything we see and is constantly doing this threat calculation. What's the problem here? Well, first of all, we have a problem in the fact that when you get up here and speak and do the aerosol eye thing, you send a message to audiences. In fact, most business presenters have trained audiences to feel that it's okay to step back once from the whole presentation process. I mean, if I were to get up here and say, hi, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Doug Jeffries, and I want to thank you all for coming here tonight. And for the next 85 minutes or so, what you'll notice is I will never look any one of you directly in the eye. In fact, to me, you're not even really people. You're just this one big amorphous blob, and that's what we do. We give audiences permission that it's okay to feel this lack of connection because they can't possibly feel connected when there's never any real meaningful contact. The other thing is that when people get up and speak and they start engaging in behaviors that pump up the anxiety, the audience never sees the speaker, never sees quite the level of an anxiety that the speaker might herself feel, but it still emanates to some degree. Anything that you do which projects a concept of nervousness, lack of comfort on your part, does exactly the wrong thing you want when you're trying to impart people with new information. You're all familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which applies to societies, really. But it's the same basic principle, is that, unfortunately, reality is that for every one of you out here, the most important thing on your mind are your basic comforts. And you know this to be true, right? Sitting in the audience, if you're cold, if you're hot, you're thinking about that. If the program's been going on too long and you're hungry or you're thirsty, you're thinking about that. If your bladder's full, that's number one priority. Number one priority is, when is this going to be over so I can hit the restroom, correct? And that's what happens. So anything you do to make an audience feel uncomfortable gets them thinking about something other than your program. And if you want to achieve true knowledge transfer, which is what a presentation is supposed to be all about, again, you, the speaker, and every individual in the audience have to be on the same page, on the same wavelength every step of the way. You can't give them any reason to be thinking of things other than your message. In Western civilization, what do we typically connect with looking people in the eye? What message does it send when we look people in the eye? Trust, yes, thank you. Tell them the truth. Tell them the truth. Veracity, you can be believed. As well as the opposite, when you look away, you send a message that you're not telling the truth. When you can't hold eye contact with somebody while you're trying to tell them that you got the greatest product in the world, or, no, Your Honor, I wasn't anywhere near there that night. When you look at somebody and you expect them to, and you want them to tell you the truth, you expect them to look in your eye. Tell me, did you take that last cookie from the cookie jar? We associate eye contact with telling the truth, with the possible exception of presidents of the United States. It's very difficult for humans to just look someone in the eye, I did not, and lie. And lie. We don't do it very well. We associate eye contact with telling the truth, and we associate looking away with not telling the truth, right? Besides the fact that it all runs up against rule number one, which is if you're working too hard, you're doing it wrong. Which is you're thinking about what you're going to say next. In fact, for most speakers, the most important thing on their mind, their number one thing on their mind is the next thing they're going to say. So they're always thinking about that next thing they're going to say, and in order to do that, we've got to stack up thoughts. You've got to stack up like 6, 8, 10 thoughts at once in this queue, so then as the words come out of your mouth, you got the next one to come down. Then you couple that with the fact that now you figure out, how am I going to distribute all this? So again, we're creating thoughts up here,
and we have the words coming out, and then
we listen to the words coming out of our mouths like this. We're like automatic peasants, right? So then we try to send on, and now we're distributing all of. That's doing too many things. Solution we call lock, talk, and pause. Lock, talk, and pause.
And it looks like this. Instead of aerosol eyes, it involves the speaker actually engaging individuals in the audience. It actually involves the speaker having eye contact with individuals in the audience as he or she delivers the thoughts that she wants to say. It involves locking eyes with one person. You're never talking to a group of people. You're only ever talking to people in a group. Okay? You're never talking to a group of individuals. You're always speaking to the individuals in the group. So when you're speaking, you need to give your speech as a series of one-on-one conversations, talking to one person at a time. A series of one-on-one conversations.
Then, as we mentioned before, probably the most difficult thing that people can learn to do, though, is once they've completed that thought to that one person, is to pause before they move on to the next. It's all about the pause. The pause is what we mean when we say that people only start listening to you once you stop talking.
And if we don't engage in behaviors such as talking to one person at a time, such as forgetting the fact that there are 200 people out here, because it really doesn't matter how many people there are. When you're doing it right, you're only speaking to one person at a time. People ask me, what's the greatest number of people you've ever delivered to? And I say, one. Because that's what I do. I'm never speaking to more than one person at a time. And what I'm doing is I'm delivering what I have to say to one person, finishing my thought, and then again, the hardest part, I'm pausing. I'm pausing before turning to the next person and giving the next person my thought.
So, when you're doing it right, it looks a little bit more like this. First thing you want to know, by the way, whenever you get up to speak to a group of people, before you get out of your seat and come up here, pick out the person with whom you're going to begin speaking.
Otherwise, you're going to get into start looking around for those friendly faces. You ever told that one? Before you speak, find a friendly face in the audience. Look to them. People look all around trying to find it and start the whole process. So in this particular case, you notice what happens. We're locking on one person. When we lock on one person, everything else kind of fades away. So all of our attention is just on that one, and our brain isn't having to make these new calculations all the time, trying to do this new threat calculation, trying to figure out how to get cranked up. Everything kind of fades away.
This is showing 5 seconds, and in our corporate training classes, this is an exercise we do. We have people actually get up and speak, tell a story about a communication experience, a vacation, whatever, but they get up to speak and they have to hold eye contact with members of their group for 5 seconds before moving on, or a minimum of 5 seconds. And it's a great exercise for people to do because if you are like most people, you're used to holding eye contact for no more than 1 second. So it's like this, lock. When you lock on somebody, when you have a clear target, it allows you to clear your brain of all the other things other than that person to whom you're speaking. It's a matter of keeping track of a lot less information. And then when you do lock on one person, it facilitates conversation that audiences look to today in terms of having a believable presentation experience. What people appreciate today is they want to know you as a person. They come to hear you speak because they want to hear what you have to say about your topic. John Kennedy was a very significant person in the speaking world because he was really the bridge. He was the bridge from the old style, the old oratory style, to the new humanistic style. In fact, that's what Kennedy brought to the whole process. Kennedy was the first president who was actually human. Well, he was. He would, at press conferences, you never know. Somebody asked a question, he'd crack a joke. Well, presidents didn't joke before then. That wasn't part of it, You had to maintain a certain stature, You were the president of the United States. And Jack Kennedy brought being human into the whole process of speaking. Tell me this, who would you most want to emulate when you get up in front of the room? Somebody give me a name. Who do you most want to be like speaking to a group? Bill Clinton, hear that? Actually, there's only one right answer here. Yourself.
Our method is different from what most people have heard elsewhere because it focuses on one thing, and that is on simply being you. I ask a lot of my classes, I say, okay, if you could be anybody, when you get up in front of a group, who would you most like to emulate? Who do you most want to be like? And I get names, you get Bill Clinton, and I say, well, actually, there's only one right answer, and that's you. The person that people have come to see is you. We get calls all the time. People say, well, listen, I want you to work with the CEO because he needs help with presentation skills, but I got to tell you, what he really needs help with is his accent. And this accent might be a Brooklyn accent. Obviously, in today's diversified culture, we have people from all over the world. What we show them is, again, being a great speaker is learning how to be comfortable being you. It's the human input that you attach to the facts that you're trying to present that get people involved. And the only way they get involved is when they know you're being sincere. People think that when they get up in front of a group, they have to adopt some type of whole new personality. They have to be a different person. And what we show them is it's about being you, the person that you are. And when you learn to do that, what you realize is that things like accents just they add to color. It's the type of thing that people really appreciate, and it's the type of thing that really helps get your message across in a sincere way.
Finally, and here's the tough part again for people to believe first time out, and that is it's actually in the pause where you create your entire presentation. For 99% of all business speakers, you're up here talking, and the most important thing on your mind is always the next thing you're going to say. So you're always processing that next thing. And while you're processing that next thing to say, of course, there are words coming out of your mouth. The quality of those words coming out of your mouth are severely eroded by the fact that you're trying to come up with that next thing you're going to say. With this method of lock, talk, and pause, it's about never thinking 5 minutes down the road, 1 minute down the road, 15 seconds down the road. What you're always thinking about, the most important thing on your mind, is the next time you're going to pause. See, I only have to keep track of, oh, that's right, one thought. I have to keep track of one thought, and who am I giving it to? I'm not trying to distribute it all around once a second. I'm giving that one thought to one person. I'm maintaining eye contact with that person through that thought. There, it's done. And when you're only creating that one thought at a time, what happens is you find that the quality of the words that come out of your mouth tends to increase. You tend to speak in fully structured sentences. You tend to say things that create a sentence that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, typically a subject, some action, and an object. You tend to say fewer words, but the words that you do say are much more full of meaning because you're not just appending on. It only works when the most important thing on your mind is the next time you're going to pause. So here's what happens. The benefit, of course, is when you do engage people one-on-one, when you're able to look people in the eye, you send a message not of being anxious, but of being confident. Because obviously you can't look somebody in the eye unless you feel right about what you're going to say. And so when you send this message of confidence, it makes the audience, instead of being uncomfortable by watching all your nervous reactions, it helps to make them more comfortable. The other thing you do, of course, when you look people in the eye is we send this message of sincerity. And then finally, when indeed, no matter how big your group, when you can indeed look them in the eye and talk, when you can think in these nice structured sentences, when you give people the time to hear what you last said before you ask them to build onto that with the next bit of information, you are able to create a two-way communication with your audience. And this two-way communication, because you're sending the message that that's right, I'm actually talking, that presenter's actually talking to me. I mean, he wasn't talking to me the whole time, but he kept coming back to me. And you get the impression that the presenter actually cares about you as an audience member, learning, understanding what he has to say. And so what you do is you end up creating a bond with the audience that is so totally unlike the relationship you have when you are spewing into the ether, never holding eye contact. So it changes your whole approach. And what happens is you then end up getting huge amounts of positive feedback when people look at you rather than looking out to an audience. And those times where you do maybe hold eye contact for a couple seconds, what do you typically see? You see people with their heads down working their BlackBerries or doing anything other than being engaged with you. It works both ways. It's a win-win. You feel better, you're processing a lot less, your anxiety is way down, and the audience is getting the benefits of knowing that you're making them comfortable and you're telling the truth. When you're doing it right, it's always a win-win for both the audience and the speaker. The reason a pause is so important is the pause when you speak is equivalent to the paragraph in the written word. It's that simple. How many people like to read textbooks that have nothing but solid text over a page? No breaks, no anything? I remember some chemistry books, physics books. You know, you look at a page that's completely filled with text, no breaks whatsoever. Your brain looks at it and goes, no, I don't think so, and you close the book. Now, you take a newspaper. Think about a newspaper. Anybody know how many sentences there are in the average newspaper paragraph? 2. USA Today, 1. But really, pick up a newspaper, and the average numbers of sentences in paragraph is 2. Because why? Well, newspapers are in the business of trying to deliver new information to people quickly. They know they have one shot to give it to you, because most people don't hold on to newspapers. They don't, you know, they're not reference material. They read them through, and then they toss them in the trash on their way off the train. So the process of getting information, a lot of new information to people quickly, involves being able to parcel it out into nice little bite-sized morsels that the brain can ingest. The paragraph is a big key to that. Think about it. When a paragraph comes out, you read across paragraph, 1 sentence, 2 sentences, then what do you get? You get nice white space. That white space is brain rest. And then even before we ask you to take in more information, we give you a little more white space, a little more brain rest. That's what a paragraph's all about. Well, the pause in speech works exactly the same way. That in order to get your audience to really take in what you have to say, you got to learn to stop talking. Stop talking long enough for them to ingest that last thing you said, get a picture of it, try to put it into a context that they know before moving on to the next thing you're going to say. And it also provides for those few times that maybe you do run out of something to say and you pause. Well, if you're like most people and you talk on and on and on and on, continually on, eventually your mouth can outrun your brain, and then when that happens, the pause that comes because you can't think of what you're going to say next can be very pregnant. The pause is absolutely the most important thing you can do. People have a hard time appreciating that because they think that speaking is about speaking. You learn to establish the pace. You learn that what speaking is all about is finding one person, giving one thought, and then having one pause long enough for them to ingest the last thing you said. One person, one thought, one pause. And then finally, probably the most important thing is by breaking information down and giving people these frequent, constant chances to hear that last thing, it helps them to build a picture of what you're talking about in their mind. In other words, they take a building block, they hear that, all right, got that, rest, all right, and the next thing you say, they build on top of that, next thing you say, you build on top of it. And people can much more clearly not just hear what you say, but they in this picture, they can engage a lot more senses. They can become part of it. And your message gets through much more deeply. Mark Twain gets a lot of things attributed to him that he never said, but one of the things he did say was that the right word may be effective, but no word was ever as effective as a rightly timed pause. Somebody shout out the name of somebody in public life that they would consider to be a good public speaker. Barack Obama. Barack Obama understands the power of the pause. Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, I go with that. Anybody else? Okay, Reagan, Colin Powell. Interesting. I won't go there. Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton is a name that often rises to the top. People think of Bill Clinton, regardless of what we think of his politics, which we won't get into. Regardless of what you think of his politics, most people consider Bill Clinton to be a good public speaker. And the reality is Bill Clinton was, some poor kid from Arkansas that made it to a pretty high office, President of the United States. Because one thing Bill Clinton knows how to do is speak. And when you analyze Bill Clinton's speeches, if you ever have a chance to see him speak, or if you go on the internet and type in Bill Clinton video, you can find them all over the place. In fact, I encourage you to do that when you leave here. Type in Bill Clinton video. Look at any example of Bill Clinton speaking. Bill Clinton is thought of as a great speaker, and he is a great speaker. Bill Clinton is the master of the pause. I'm going to play for you a segment of Bill Clinton's inauguration speech. in 1997. And what I want you to do is I want you to, feel free to close your eyes if you want, but I want you to listen to and count the number of words he says in a row before pausing. And we'll try to get a consensus here of the average number of words he says together before he pauses.
My fellow citizens, at this last presidential inauguration of the 20th century, let us lift our eyes toward the challenges that await us in the next century. It is our great good fortune that time and chance have put us not only at the edge of a new century in a new millennium, but on the edge of a bright new prospect in human affairs. A moment that will define our course and our character for decades to come. We must keep our old democracy forever young. Guided by the ancient vision of a promised land, let us set our sights upon a land of new promise. The promise of America was born in the 18th century out of the bold conviction that we are all created equal. It was extended and preserved in the 19th century when our nation spread across the continent, saved the Union, and abolished the awful scourge of slavery. Then, in turmoil and triumph, that promise exploded onto the world stage to make this the American century. And what a century it has been.
What was his average, would you say? 5? Eh? Well, there were some times he would go 8, but did you hear how many times he went 2? And a lot of times 3. And you'd hear those words, and then boom, you'd have that pause. And so when it was over, you actually heard everything that he said. When you hear a person speak like that, you can follow, can't you? And not only follow it, but, well, I think it was fairly well proved, most people were rather moved by Bill Clinton. In fact, Bill Clinton had the ability to get up there and give a speech, and if you didn't know better, you'd believe him. The guy knows what he's doing. He's the master of the pause. The interesting thing about Clinton is his handlers showed him films of, can anybody guess the person Clinton thinks of his mentor? JFK. Anybody in the audience old enough to remember Jack Kennedy? He was the president of the United States. John Kennedy was a very significant person in the speaking world because he was really the bridge. He was the bridge from the old style, the old oratory style, to the new humanistic style.
I have chosen this time and place to discuss a topic on which ignorance too often abounds and the truth too rarely perceived. And that is the most important topic on earth, peace. I speak of peace because of the new face of war. Total war makes no sense in an age where great powers can maintain large and relatively invulnerable nuclear forces and refuse to surrender without resort to those forces. It makes no sense in an age where a single nuclear weapon contains almost 10 times the explosive force delivered by all the Allied air forces in the Second World War. It makes no sense in an age when the deadly poisons produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and seed to the far corners of the globe and to generations yet unborn.
Jack Kennedy spoke in groups of words, 3, 4, or 5 words at most, with a space, a pause between each one. And that was the model that Bill Clinton used and uses today when he speaks. Anybody know what this is? Carnegie Hall. Anybody know how to get there? Practice, 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 exactly. Well, what I'm here to tell you is that with lock, talk, and pause, is the last thing you want to do is practice, practice, practice. In fact, the best presentations are given
when the presenter has a great body of knowledge but hasn't spent a moment thinking about what she's going to say. In other words, the best presentations occur when you could give the same presentation a dozen times, and every time, hopefully it's different. Because every time, if you're doing it right, you're just dealing with those thoughts that come to you from your own internal knowledge base at the moment. You're always living in that moment because you know that the pauses that you have provide plenty of time to come up with that one thought, which is the next one out of your mouth. Every one of you here has within you the ability to create that one thought on the spot. Because that's what you're doing anyway, only you've got 6, 8, 10 of them, and you're trying to juggle them all around, and you're trying to come out with one. And what we're saying here is that that's working too hard. By the way, anybody ever hear Bill Clinton's buddy Al Gore speak? Do we like Al Gore? Do we think of Al Gore as being a great speaker? Al Gore spoke at the 2000 convention when he did his acceptance speech for the presidential nomination. Al Gore had his 130-point program for America that he thought was very important to get out. I'm serious. That's what he called it, 130-point. And what he had 45 minutes to speak. And so he started out, and Al Gore spoke for 45 minutes straight without ever pausing for a moment. And what happened was, during the first 20 minutes of his speech, people hearing things that they like would applaud. They tried to applaud. But then they found that although they would applaud, he wouldn't stop speaking. And so then it became something they felt very uncomfortable with because they were talking over him. They were applauding over him. And so for the last 20 minutes of the speech, he spoke and nobody applauded at all. He just spoke for 20 minutes straight, not a single break. And I think if you were to give a pop quiz to the audience and ask them how many of those 130 points for America people could remember, probably was no more than 3. So it's about eye contact. Effective speaking requires finding one person in the audience to whom you're going to give a thought. Give that entire thought to one person. Carry on a series of one-on-one conversations with each and every member of the audience, and then learning how to pause, giving them a moment for all that to sink in before you move on to the next person. If we were to ask at the end of your last presentation how each of these 3 aspects affected the audience or impacted the audience, how do you think these 3 items would add up to, say, 100%? How important are each one of these? What you had to say, what you sounded like when you said it, or how you looked? Survey says how you look. 55% of the impact you have in the audience is based on how you look. And not, was she wearing an Armani suit? Did she have diamond? It's how did the speaker comport herself? Did she look comfortable? Did she look confident? Same thing when it comes to how you sound. 38% of your impact is how you sound. And what you have to say? Not that much. How you sound sends those same type of images because people know that if somebody can say something in a nice strong voice, that they probably believe it. Most of us aren't very good at saying things we don't believe or saying things we're not sure of in a very loud voice. Think of times when you go to a party, you're introduced to a whole bunch of people, and then throughout the night, somebody comes up, you go, "Hi, Bob, how you going? Good party? Yeah. Hi, Sally, having a good time?" Then you see somebody you don't quite know. "Hey, how are you?" We tend to mumble through, don't we? Anybody like to sing in the car? Radio comes on, sing in the car? When you're alone, what kind of volume do you sing at? Pretty high. How about when somebody else is in the car? Yeah. See, when we're by ourselves, it really doesn't matter. We don't have to worry about how good our voice is, but when we're not sure how we sound, we tend to throttle it back. Right? So just like eye contact sends strong signals about credibility, our voice, the volume we put behind the words, says loads about how strongly we feel, how confident we feel in the words that we say. The unfortunate thing about this study here, of course, is most presenters spend all their time coming up with what they're going to say. They think it's all about what they say. Most of the presentations we see, and most of the presenters we see, are hamstrung by the fact that they try to say way too much in a presentation. They try to get across way too many sets of facts, especially those about which they don't really strongly know or believe or are passionate about. Anybody know who Peggy Noonan is? Anybody know that name, Peggy Noonan? She was a speechwriter for President Reagan. She writes a column in the Wall Street Journal. She's written a number of books on public speaking. One of her favorite sayings when talking about the audience is that they won't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Pretty simple saying, but it's strong when you think about it. Audiences are moved by your passion. In fact, passion is really the only thing that people listen to. People need to know how strongly you believe in what you say. And when you believe in something, they're going to be moved by it. Great speakers know that. Bill Clintons of the world know that. That the words, the 130-point program for America is worthless. A 3-point program for America about what you could really speak with some tremor, some depth, with some confidence is what's going to move people.
It's not about your message, it's about how you say it. So what this is leading to is how then, once you've established this eye contact, so that the audience believes you, and you make them comfortable, and once you've realized that it's all in the pause, where you're going to be creating your next thought, one thought at a time, delivered to one person at a time, how then do you take it to the next level and get people emotionally involved?
Gestures go back to rule number 2. When you're doing it right, it's a win-win for both the speaker and the audience. Remember the 3 rules. If you're working too hard, you're doing it wrong. When you're doing it right, it's a win-win. And third, people only start listening when you stop talking. But the way gestures work as a win-win is when you actually get your body involved to paint a picture of what you're saying.
What I mean by this is that for the audience, using gestures allows them to see a better picture of what you're trying to say, or at the same time for the presenter, it gives the presenter an opportunity to get rid of all this excess energy that's running through. Every time you move a muscle, we're burning calories. We're burning up this energy. And by being able to move your body, get the body involved, you dispense with much of that excess energy.
What happens with the audience is it involves more of their senses. I mean, I could get up to the podium and I could tell you all about all the great things that are going to happen here. And I can do it. But of course, the trouble with podiums is when your hands get attached, it's the 10,000 volts and they never come off. So you can't really get the rest of your body involved. So now you have this static picture of somebody speaking. But when you get your body involved, you involve more senses. You get people to, that's right. And we all know that we remember so much of what we hear, but we remember significantly more about what we hear and see. We actually remember most about what we hear, see, and do, which is why in training we often try to do exercises to get people involved, but we increase significantly the impact we have on audiences when we engage more of their senses. And gestures will do just that.
Also, you can tend to reinforce words so that you just don't talk, well, it's very important that we get our profits up and we get our costs down. You say it's very important that we get our profits up here and we get our costs down here. Because see, it's a difference between, we have your sales up. We get sales up here and our costs down here. The difference between sales and costs is profit. And profit, oh, that's right, that's where profit sharing comes from.
So we reinforce words and they make them stronger than just the sounds coming out of our voice.
And also, using your body, getting your body involved is a good way to overcome occasional attention gaps on the part of the audience. Anybody here willing to admit that since the start of this program that they had maybe a thought or two outside this room? I'm hurt.
In fact, I'm done. Thank you. No, stop. They want me to go. Attention gaps. Again, we're multitaskers. We're sent to presentations. We're sent to hear people talk, and yet we've got all kinds of things in our minds, like that call that we didn't make to the client, or that report that has to get out, or that's right, maybe we were even thinking about that little discussion we had with our spouse before we left the house this morning.
Nobody comes to a presentation carrying this excess of attention.
You never have 100%. You have maybe 85 if you're lucky. Well, the point is, so with these different attention, and when audiences lose attention, one of the problems is they'll drift off, they'll start thinking about something else. And then when they do start to come back, they hear something and they go, what was that? And then they start trying to think what the last thing you said. Of course, you're still speaking, and so now the attention gap still continues because they're thinking about something and you're talking about something different. The point is, by using gestures, being able to fill attention gaps, people can see, and sometimes you just get over that gap and you don't lose them once again. Audiences, we give audiences all the opportunities they want to go off on these journeys of self-discovery. Your job is to keep them all on your particular path.
The energy that you throw out works not just to your benefit because you're getting rid of that nervous energy, but it works for the audience's benefit because you're more comfortable and they're more comfortable. Now, what happens, unfortunately, is that people often engage in gestures that aren't very effective. One we see here is the arrogant stance. You see this is the CEO, or this is the one that we call it the George Patton stance. You know, this one. No poor bastard ever won a war by dying for his country. Won a war by making some other poor dumb bastard die for his country. It sends a signal of arrogance, which most people don't. Like this one, we call the phone booth, crossed arms. This is one that we see a lot.
This is probably the most common thing people do when they get up is they tend to hug themselves, you know. This is comfortable, actually. I like this. Actually, I love me. This is good, you know. I feel really secure like this. But the problem is if I try to talk about having to get sales up and we have to get our expenses down, you know, you're limited by having your arms completely locked together in terms of the impact that you can have. So, and again, think about this. Think where the energy is going now when I'm like this. It just, or even when we do this, you know, the prisoner. We often see this.
Well, here's one we see. We call this the fig leaf, which is not. We see more men do this than women. The only thing worse than the fig leaf is the talking fig leaf. You know, when they start to do the gestures and they do.
One of the most common things you see, we have the key changer. Where, because, and again, men probably more than women are more comfortable when they have their hands in their pockets. Johnny Carson used to have his hand in his pocket. Is anybody old enough to remember Johnny Carson? Okay. And he would often talk like this, had one hand in his pocket. Fortunately, Johnny Carson is a great example of, and when I told you before, you'll never look at a presenter in the same way again. The problem is that all the rules that we talk about, all the ways to do things right, are often broken by people who can. Those people who can break rules because they have what we don't, and that's called charisma. It's true. Believe me. We've been trying to quantify charisma for 20 years. If we could, we'd package it, put it in a class, and charge $100,000 a day for it. Because you could go on to be president if you had charisma. You could be like Bill Clinton, and if you have charisma, you can get away with almost anything. One of the things people with charisma can get away with is breaking the rules when it comes to speaking. Johnny Carson had a lot of charisma. You could do that. But the point is, hands in your pockets are not a great thing. First of all, if you notice this, if I were to shake my pockets, notice that you don't hear anything. Often when somebody's shaking the pocket, the audience is going, hey, it sounds like a couple quarters, dime. See? He's got about 85 cents in there, I think. What do you think? So if I were to shake mine, you wouldn't hear anything, because as a professional, what I do is I empty my pockets before speaking.
But the trouble, of course, with the hands in the pockets, it restricts your ability to reinforce a word. So you try to talk about, we got to get our sales up, we got to get our costs down, want the whole company together on this, all right? The idea with gestures is to always have as much air under the wings available as possible. And the only way you can really do that is to put your hands to what we call the neutral position. You just let them drop by your side. You just have to learn to not think about them so that when you do want to make a point, they're right there to do it. So typically it's just this, feet shoulder width apart, hands to neutral, unless you're using them to gesture. That's simple. If you can't do anything that you learned here today, if you do nothing else, you take nothing home, you learn this one, is that all great communicators knew how important it was to smile. When we talk about eye contact, we talk about, really, I always preface it by saying in Western civilizations, Western cultures, we tend to associate eye contact with telling the truth. But there are other cultures where eye contact is not appropriate, or eye contact has more rules. Typically in Asia, cultures there demand a certain level of equality with the person who's looking you in the eye. If you're in Japan and you work for the company as a middle manager, you can't look the CEO in the eye, right? Just that's how it works. Well, there was a woman from Africa who explained to me that in her country, what it came down to was this, that if you didn't look somebody in the eye, they didn't trust you. If you looked them in the eye too long, they didn't trust you. So the whole key was maintaining eye contact and smiling, because the eye contact showed the trust, but the smile disarmed any threat that people felt by holding eye contact, which I thought was pretty interesting. Yeah, many times the body language of the audience will tell you how you're doing. Looking out to an audience, seeing many people asleep is usually not a good thing. That usually comes from speaking without passion. It comes from speaking in a monotone. Tone and inflection are not only important to get people involved, but the interesting thing about tone and inflection is it's true that the exact same words with different inflections on different words changes the meaning. I didn't say he stole the money. 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 We can say the same things, same exact words, and here's the problem you get into with scripts, or if you think that speaking is about following a script, about saying a set of preset words, is that any time you try to work from a script, it tends to flatten out your delivery, and you often lose the inflection that's very important on any one given word, where, as you can see, can often completely change the meaning of what it is you have to say. So inflection's a good thing. Changes in pitch and tone is a good thing. It helps to show passion, helps to keep interest up. It's very difficult to use a lot of tone and inflection if you're trying to deliver a preset set of words. It's real important that everything we talk about, using gestures and getting this passion out, the fact that people only are ever inspired by the passion behind what you say, it's very difficult to have passion with a script. What you really want to do is you want to approach virtually every presentation as if you've never seen it before. I go to places all the time, work in hotels, give speeches, and they always leave me a podium because they assume that podiums are good things. The trouble with podiums is podiums go back to that Winston Churchill type era. Podiums are not basically a good thing because podiums tell the audience exactly what you don't want to tell them, which is, okay, there will forever be this barrier between me and you. And that's what a podium does. Think about this. This is my little castle, isn't it? This is mine. I've got this turret here where I can fire off stuff at you all. But I'm protected, you know? If you're going to hit me, I've got this. No, it's really true. So we set up this, we tell the audience that I'm going to be behind. There's forever going to be this barrier between me and you. You're you, I'm me, and never the twain shall meet. Podiums tend to really work against this connectivity that you want to establish with your audience if you want to be effective. Just a little bit on organization, on putting a presentation together in a way that can help people follow it and also, again, make sure they're engaged. Anybody here listen to WIIFM? Right, most listened to radio station in the world. In fact, it's the only thing your listeners are ever listening to. What's in it for me? That's what people want. So, rule number one when you're putting together your presentation is, again, you've got to step out from behind your computer, go back and look at the screen, and ask yourself, as a member of the audience, would you find something of real benefit there? And if not, then it probably doesn't belong in your presentation. You know, it's very fashionable these days to use words like death by PowerPoint, to PowerPoint poisoning. It's fashionable to trash PowerPoint, say that it is the bane of civilization. The reality is that PowerPoint is actually a very useful tool for creating true knowledge transfer. The problem with PowerPoint is that nobody ever gets taught how to use it correctly. PowerPoint's one of those programs that you actually can hand to somebody and they know how to use the software in a very short period of time. And because of that, corporations have thought, okay, we're not going to pay people to learn how to do something that you can do in an afternoon. But the problem is learning how to use the software and learning how to create these living, moving documents that have a very specific purpose, which is getting across
information in a limited and set period of time is something that, well, none of us are taught. And the assumption that you can simply pick up a copy of PowerPoint and write a presentation is the same as assuming that if you got a copy of Microsoft Word, you could write the great American novel. Well, tell me this. After the, say, the title slide, the slide that's up on the screen as people walk into the room, after that slide, can anybody give me the name of the first slide in most presentations? Agenda.
Yeah, we start out with the agenda slide. We start the introduction. Hi, we're going to start here with the introduction. That's where we are now. Yeah. And then we go on to the history slide, which I always love. The history. History is everybody's favorite subject, right? Especially history of somebody's company you don't even know. Let's talk a bit about the history of our firm. We're very proud about our history. It started back in 1920. These two guys, Harry and Bill, came together. They had a great idea, blah, 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 talking on and on. And what happens is for the first 15 minutes of a presentation, we talk about, oh, that's right, first we start out, because we're working with that old adage, tell them how you're going to bore them, and tell them how you bored them, right? That's the agenda slide. Then we get into the history of our company, because I have to tell you all about our company. And you understand that, well, you're very proud about your company. You might even be proud about the fact that you're number one in your area. We're the number one company out there. In fact, we have so many, we are number one, meaning that if you go with us as a customer, you're going to mean much less to us than you would to any one of our competitors, okay? Because we're the biggest one out there. And then what do you do? Then you get to hear, well, after you see their organizational chart, names that you've never heard of before, right? And they're all over the place, you can't possibly keep track of them. Then they go on to tell you just what a great job they've been doing with the revenues. You know, last year we were number one in our market. We took everybody else's money. This year we're after yours. And that's what we do. That's what we do. We spend presentations. The first half of a typical presentation is about me. Let me tell you about me. This is the message that we send with the typical content of a presentation. We start out talking about how we're going to bore them, and then we start immediately talking about ourselves. Well, if people are in sales, you remember from some sales training that, oh, that's not necessarily the right way to do it, is it? That most people, most clients want to hear about them. So, first thing you need to do is when you start out, you got about 30 seconds to grab their attention. About 30 seconds, and that's about it. Understand, we live in a world of these things. We live in a world with things that look like this. They're remotes. If it's a remote for the TV, Cox Communications out of Atlanta will tell you that the average surfer, the average channel surfer on TV, gives a station how long? 10 seconds. They give it 10 seconds watching it before they determine whether the content is worth sticking with or whether they're going to click the channel onto something else. Cox will also tell you that in a search engine, you type in a word in a search engine, site comes up. How long do you give them before you decide whether that's the site that you want to stay with or you want to move on to the next one in the list? It's 2 seconds. We give websites 2 seconds to determine whether their content is relevant, has any value to us. Well, audiences tend to give presenters a relative break. They give them about 30 seconds. You've got about 30 seconds to send to the audience the message that this is worth listening to. TV news departments have been using grabbers for decades. 10:30 at night comes on, the announcement comes on. Doctors determined that exercise is bad for you. Story at 11. But when's the story? It's typically not at 11, right? It's usually they wait. Oh, that's right. At the very last end of the news. And what do you learn? You learn that doctors noted that men over the age of 75 who have had more than 4 heart attacks should not engage in running marathons when the temperature is over 100 degrees, because it often brings on a 5th and fatal heart attack. So they've determined that exercise is bad for you. But the point is that grabber, that's what news people do, they take a fact, a true fact from the presentation, turn it around in such a way that when you hear it, you realize, well, okay, you got it, but it got you thinking. See, the agenda slide, followed by the history slide, followed by the revenue slide, is the way audiences check out within the first 2 minutes. They sit there, they hear this, and they go, my God, not this again. I've seen it, I've heard it all. They'll give you their attention for maybe the first 30 seconds before they determine whether the blackberries are coming out or you got something to listen to. And so you only have about 30 seconds to make sure that you've grabbed their attention. And that's what a grabber is all about. The purpose of a grabber is to take something out of your presentation that is indeed true and put it in a way that gets people to ask the question, what is this all about? What's going on? You can predict a specific gain. You could say something like, ladies and gentlemen, the next 45 minutes, we're going to show you how we doubled our closing ratio with just one fundamental change to the way we approached our prospects. A specific doubled, and it's got to be a big number. If you're talking about numbers, you can't say, ladies and gentlemen, the next 30 minutes, we're going to show you how you can increase your productivity up to 1.5%. Have I got you? It has to be a specific gain, it has to be of some significant value. Or you can let them in on a secret. This is, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you a story that's never been told before. Everybody likes to hear stories. As a matter of fact, when it comes to content, anytime you can make your case, anytime you can figure out how to take statistics or any facts that might be otherwise dry and turn them into a story, that's where people listen. And that's a whole course by itself. But people want to be told stories. Pick up the Wall Street Journal today. Pick it up any day. Look at the left-hand column, right-hand column. Every one of them starts out back in 1985 when the internet was still the gleam in the eye of Harry Brown working in his father's warehouse. He said there had to be a better way. So he worked. You have characters, you have a problem, you have a timeline along to a resolution of that problem. Stories keep people's attention. In any case, here's what you got to do. You got to start out, tell the people what the problem is that needs to be solved, tell them what the opportunity is that they need to take advantage of. And then here's where we differ from the way we see most of them structured. Immediately, in the beginning of your presentation, you have to tell them what the solution is, or you have to make that recommendation. See, typically what people do is they'll start out and announce this problem, and then they'll start to pile on the evidence. And they'll say, and people go, oh, I didn't know that. Okay. And you give them some more evidence, they'll go, oh, I didn't know that either. Okay. And by the time they've heard the third or fourth factor saying, where is she going with this? You see, what you have to do is you have to create the context. So you have to tell people exactly where you're going, what your solution is right from the start, so that as you provide this evidence, people can hear it and say, oh, I didn't know that, but, well, yeah, I guess that's right. If that's true, then that is the only solution. And then you bring in the evidence, and again, hopefully the evidence will include benefits to the audience because it's the only thing they're ever listening to. Then, at the end, and here's something, believe it or not, this is something we rarely see, the end of a presentation, you've gotten a whole bunch of people together, you talk to them for 45 minutes, and at the end you go, thanks for listening. Bye. And we send people off. I mean, without some type of next step, some call to action. And call to action is just like you all know that's the mistake that new salespeople make, is they often go out, they're great public relations people for the company, right? They sing a great song. Oh, that's right, they forgot to ask for the order. Well, having a call to action, and it doesn't have to be anything big. You just implant in their minds some future action that they have to take. So, okay, given all this, will you do me a favor? Just send me an email. Will you send me an email? Tell me the 3 different products that you're most interested in, and let me get you some samples. Let me get you some, or let me see if we can set up a demonstration for you. Just send me. You put in their minds some future event, some future action they have to take, for the sole reason of giving them some reason to think about your presentation after they've walked out the door. Otherwise, people go on in their multitasking lives, they've got all other things to think about, and this was an interesting presentation, but there is no reason beyond here to think back about what you had to say. You need to have a call to action, a next step. And then finally, if you can, you want to end with a bang. And the reason you want to end with a bang is the same reason that an Olympic gymnast goes out and flips over the bars, does all this fantastic stuff in the air. What does she have to do to earn the points? Stick the landing, exactly, end with a bang. So, as you go forth from here tonight, you will be thinking about eye contact. You'll want to be holding eye contact with people through the end of a thought. And when you do, what you'll find is although in the beginning people might, because they've been trained that way, might not look back at you, but just a few minutes into your presentation, you're going to see that people react quite differently than how they've ever reacted before. And the next time you get up to speak and you put this all together, you nail it.